Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you how to be lazy and let Excel do your math for you. So you can just ask Excel to do all your math. Now, here's just a quick example. You've got something that looks like a teacher's grade book, and I'm going to tell you that your homework average is worth 40% of your grade. Your test average is 45% of your grade, and then your final exam is worth 15% of your grade. And what we want to do is we want to calculate that final exam grade right, or your final grade right here, your average grade. And you could of course do this by hand, but we're going to be too lazy to do that by hand because that just sounds like the way we want to do this. Now, you could of course do this by hand. So, for example, if we're going to talk about old Fred right here, if we're going to talk about Fred who didn't do his homework, he failed his tests, and he failed his final exam. Good job, Fred. You could do that math, and you could say by hand you want his homework average, which is 65, and you want to multiply that. I'll give you a little multiplication sign. You multiply 65 times 0.4. Then you would have to keep going. You say, okay, then I want to add whatever I got here to his test average, which is 54, times that percentage, which is 0.45. And then you'd have to keep going and say, I also want Fred's final exam, which is 43 times that percent. So that's 43 times 0.15. Now, when you've done that, I can't get my point right here. When you've done that, and there's a decimal place, whatever. When you've done that, you have come up with his final grade. But what we want to do is we want to be really general and let Excel do this for us. So here's what we're going to do. So here's Fred right here. Instead of talking about this 65, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it by the name of the cell that it's in. So we're not going to say 65. Instead of that 65, what we're going to do is we're going to say the name of that cell. Instead of 65, we're going to call that B4, because this is in column B, row 4. So instead of 65, we're just going to call that B4. So we want B4, same thing, just calling it by its name, times 0.4. Now think about this 54 right here. We don't want to call it 54. We want to call it by the name of the cell that it's in. It is in cell C4. C4. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, I'm not going to talk about 54. I'm going to call that C4. And then the same thing when it comes to that 43. Instead of that 43, we're going to talk about that 43 by his cell name, which is D4. So, boop, we're going to get rid of him. We're going to call him D4. Now, that's a nice general way that will let Excel reference those cells for you. Now, here's what's going to happen. If I'm going to put this math in, I want to click exactly where I want that math. So I want that math to be right here in the final grade. Then I'm going to start typing. When I start typing, the weird thing about math in Excel is you always start your math with an equal sign. So you want it to be equal to, and we said B4 times 0.4. The weird thing about times is you have to use the asterisk, the asterisk is on the 8. So Shift 8, use the asterisk. B4 times 0.4, which is what we're talking about, plus C4. So I'm just going to type this out like a little math equation, plus C4 times 0.45 plus, and then let's cheat. Let's look at our math equation again. We said C4 times 0.45. Then we had this D4 times 0.15. So we'll go back to here and say plus D4 times 0.15. And that was all we did is, and notice it'll highlight these little things in green to kind of help you see what you've done. So the B4 is really talking about that cell. The C4 is really talking about that it's green and it's green. See how the color coding helps? Once you get that in, don't forget it starts with an equal sign. If you hit enter, it does the math for you. Now, you may think I could have done that in my calculator, and you could have, but watch this. Now, since this formula only references the cells by name, I could go back to B4. If this kid all of a sudden turned in all his homework, boom, then this calculation changed for you. And so now you're happy because that is very general and awesome. So you could also, once you've typed this formula in one time and you like it and it worked for that row, you could retype it for every row if you wanted to, but you could cheat and you could say once you have it typed in once, you could cheat, and then if you get your mouse cursor right to the very bottom corner, see how it changes to a little skinny crosshair right there, hold your mouse and drag, it will fill all of these things in. And if you click in each one, like for example, I'm going to click right here, this 91, when I look up here, it has changed. It was smart enough to figure out that you wanted to change what row you were on. So you've got B6, C6, and D6 when you're here with Sally in row 6. If I click here on Beulah in row 7, then I look up here at the formula, it figured out that you probably wanted to do the exact same thing, but with 7s. And sorry, I forgot about you, Bob. I can drag this up to Bob, and it fills it up with Bob. And now the great thing about this is it's very dynamic. If Bob all of a sudden realized he was a cheater and didn't do any of his homework, you can change that and it will automatically change his final grade right there for you. So again, anytime you're going to do your math, you start with your equal sign, you call the things by their names and not their actual numbers, and then you have some Excel math.